Have you ever wondered why the stories we learned in school felt so clean, so perfectly packaged, so conveniently simple? Because the history you think you know isn't history at all. It's propaganda. It's carefully curated fiction. And the real story, the one they don't want you to hear, is far more shocking than anything you could imagine. What I'm about to share with you will change everything you thought you knew about our past. We're going to pull back the curtain on one of humanity's greatest deceptions and journey through time, not as tourists admiring the sanitized monuments, but as investigators uncovering a crime scene, a crime that's been perpetrated for thousands of years. The systematic erasure, manipulation, and outright fabrication of human history. You see, history isn't written by the victors. That's too simple. History is manufactured by those who understand that controlling the past means controlling the present, and controlling the present means controlling the future. What we call historical fact is actually historical fiction, crafted by empires, religions, and secret societies who had everything to gain from keeping certain truths buried. Welcome to Sleep Mysteries, where hidden history meets your bedtime. Tonight, we're going to dig up those truths and explore the deliberate destruction of entire civilizations' records. We're going to uncover the systematic rewriting of religious texts that shaped the beliefs of billions. And we're going to examine physical evidence that shouldn't exist according to our official timeline. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why certain artifacts are locked away in museum basements, why certain archaeological sites are off limits, and why certain questions about our past are met with ridicule rather than research. The rabbit hole goes deeper than you think, and once you start falling, there's no going back. If these stories stir your curiosity, feel free to settle in and stay with us. Remember to like and subscribe so you can return for more hidden chapters of history, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's begin with a scene that perfectly encapsulates everything wrong with the history we've been fed. The year is 146 BCE. The great city of Carthage, rival to Rome for centuries, lies in ruins. But this isn't just the end of a war. This is the systematic annihilation of a civilization. The Roman soldiers aren't just killing people. They're burning scrolls. They're destroying tablets. They're methodically erasing every trace of Carthaginian literature, philosophy, and scientific knowledge. The smoke rises not just from buildings, but from the funeral pyre of an entire culture's voice. Imagine you're a Carthaginian scholar, watching helplessly as centuries of accumulated wisdom turns to ash. Your people's version of events, their side of the story, their contributions to mathematics, astronomy, and navigation, all of it disappearing into the Mediterranean sky. The Romans aren't just conquering a city, they're rewriting reality itself. And what do we know about Carthage today? Almost nothing. We know them through Roman eyes only. Hannibal crossing the Alps? That's a Roman story about a Roman enemy. The sophisticated trading networks that connected 3 continents? Barely a footnote. The advanced metallurgy and shipbuilding techniques? Lost forever. This wasn't an accident. This was policy. The Romans understood something that modern people have forgotten. Whoever controls the narrative controls everything. They didn't just want to defeat Carthage militarily. They wanted to ensure that future generations would never hear the Carthaginian side of the story. But here's what's truly chilling. This wasn't unique to Rome. This was the playbook, and it's been used over and over again throughout history. Let's travel east, to the campaigns of Alexander the Great. We're told he was a brilliant military strategist who spread Greek culture across the known world. We're told he was a hero of antiquity. But step into the sandals of a Persian scribe in 331 BCE as Alexander's forces approach Persepolis. You're in the great library, surrounded by thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. Astronomical calculations that rival anything the Greeks have produced. Medical texts that describe surgical procedures unknown in the West. Philosophical works that explore concepts Alexander's tutors never dreamed of. And you know, with terrible certainty, that none of it will survive what's coming. The doors burst open. Greek soldiers pour in, their torches already lit. They're not interested in preserving knowledge. They're not even interested in translating it. They're here to erase it. Because an empire built on the myth of Greek superiority can't afford to acknowledge that the barbarians they're conquering might actually be more advanced. You watch as scrolls that took lifetimes to write catch fire in seconds. You see centuries of astronomical observations feeding the flames. Mathematical proofs that could have advanced human understanding by centuries are reduced to cinders. And you realize that history isn't being made here. History is being murdered. The official records will call this a glorious victory. They'll speak of bringing civilization to the barbarians. They'll never mention the advanced Persian mathematics that was lost, or the Indian philosophical texts that were burned, or the systematic destruction of libraries across 3 continents. But the evidence was right there in the ashes, and those ashes tell a very different story than the one carved on Alexander's monuments. This pattern of deliberate historical manipulation reaches its most sophisticated form in medieval Europe, where 2 seemingly unrelated stories converge into one of history's greatest cover-ups: the suppression of the Merovingian bloodline and the destruction of the Knights Templar. The year is 751 CE. The last Merovingian king, Childeric III, sits on his throne, unaware that his reign is about to end not through battle, but through betrayal. The Merovingians had ruled the Frankish kingdoms for 3 centuries, claiming a bloodline that traced back to mysterious origins. They spoke of sacred ancestry, of bloodlines blessed by powers beyond the ordinary world. But there were others who coveted that throne, and more importantly, who feared what the Merovingian claim represented. Pepin the Short, backed by the Catholic Church, orchestrated a political and historical coup. Childeric was deposed, his hair ritually cut to symbolize the severing of his power, and the Merovingian dynasty was officially ended. But ending a dynasty and erasing its legacy are 2 different things. The knowledge they carried, the secrets they guarded, the bloodline they represented. These couldn't be eliminated by political decree. They had to be hunted down, systematically destroyed, and their guardians eliminated. Fast forward to 1307. The Knights Templar had risen to become the most powerful military and financial organization in Europe. They controlled vast wealth, commanded loyalty across kingdoms, and most dangerously of all, they claimed to possess secret knowledge. Knowledge about the true nature of Christianity. Knowledge about bloodlines. Knowledge about the Merovingian legacy. Friday the 13th, October 1307. Dawn breaks across France, but this isn't an ordinary morning. In a coordinated operation that would make modern intelligence agencies proud, King Philip IV's soldiers simultaneously strike Templar holdings across the entire kingdom. The greatest military order in Christendom is arrested in a single morning. Picture Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, awakening to the sound of armored boots in the corridors of the temple in Paris. He's survived battles in the Holy Land, negotiated with kings and popes, commanded an army that struck fear into the hearts of Saracens. But nothing has prepared him for this moment of ultimate betrayal. The charges are specific and devastating: heresy, blasphemy, secret rituals, devil worship, But these aren't random accusations. They're carefully crafted to ensure that anything the Templars might say in their defense will be dismissed as the ravings of heretics. It's character assassination on a massive scale, designed to destroy not just their lives, but their credibility. Under torture, confessions are extracted. Under the threat of burning, testimonies are given. But what's really happening here isn't justice. It's the systematic elimination of an organization that knew too much about the true foundations of European power. The Templars are executed, their property is seized, their records are burned. But most importantly, their version of events is erased from official history. Future generations will know them only as heretics who got what they deserved, never as the guardians of secrets that could have toppled kingdoms. But here's the connection that historians don't want you to see. The Templars weren't just protecting treasure or territory. They were protecting a bloodline, the Merovingian bloodline, the very lineage that had been systematically erased centuries earlier. The knowledge of this connection, the proof of its legitimacy, the implications of its survival, all of this had to be eliminated. The burning of the last Templar leader wasn't just an execution. It was the final chapter in a multi-century campaign to erase a truth so dangerous that it required the combined efforts of kings and churches to suppress it. And they succeeded, or so they thought. Because buried in medieval manuscripts, hidden in architectural symbols, encoded in artworks that survived the purge, the truth persists, waiting for someone curious enough to dig deeper than the official story. But the manipulation of historical narrative wasn't always about politics or religion. Sometimes it was about something more fundamental, the basic human need to tell the truth versus the very real threat of death for doing so. Imagine yourself in the Forbidden City, Beijing, during the reign of the Kangxi Emperor in the late 17th century. You are Liu Jiji, court historian, charged with recording the events of the dynasty for posterity. The weight of this responsibility is enormous. You understand that your words will shape how future generations understand their past. But there's a problem. The truth and the emperor's version of events don't align. You sit in your study, brush trembling in your hand, staring at a blank scroll. Yesterday, you witnessed something that contradicts the official narrative. A military campaign the emperor claims was victorious was actually a devastating defeat. Thousands of soldiers died not in glorious battle, but from disease and poor planning. Villages were burned not to eliminate enemies, but to hide evidence of the army's retreat. Your training as a historian demands that you record what actually happened. Confucian ideals insist that truth serves the greater good. But the emperor's agents have made it clear that certain truths are not welcome in the official record. You think of your predecessor, who made the mistake of recording an unflattering portrait of the previous emperor's military campaigns. His fate serves as a clear warning. Historical accuracy is a luxury you cannot afford if you value your life. The scroll remains blank as night falls. You know that tomorrow you must write something. But will it be history or propaganda? Will you serve truth or power? And do you even have a choice? This internal struggle plays out in courts across the world throughout history. The result is that even our most trusted historical sources are compromised from the moment they're written. The objective records we rely on are actually the products of fear, compromise, and survival. The manipulation of religious texts represents perhaps the most audacious rewriting of history ever attempted. Picture the scene. Nicaea, 325 CE. The Council of Nicaea isn't just a theological gathering. It's a political convention with the power to shape the beliefs of an entire civilization. Bishop Hosius stands before an assembly of religious leaders from across the Christian world. Scattered across the tables are hundreds of scrolls, codices, and manuscripts. Each one claims to contain the authentic Word of God. Each one tells a slightly different version of the Christian story. The debate is fierce and personal. Bishop Arius argues passionately for texts that describe Jesus as subordinate to God the Father. Bishop Athanasius counters with scriptures that support the concept of the Trinity. Other voices rise to defend gospels that speak of Jesus's humanity, his marriage, his political message. But this isn't really a theological debate. It's an editing session. With each vote, entire gospels are relegated to the shadows. The Gospel of Thomas, with its emphasis on inner knowledge, is deemed too mystical. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which portrays a woman as a leading apostle, threatens the emerging power structure. The Gospel of Philip, with its references to sacred marriage, contradicts the celibate priesthood. One by one, alternative versions of Christianity are voted out of existence, not because they're false, but because they're inconvenient. The Jesus who emerges from this process isn't necessarily the historical Jesus. He's the politically expedient Jesus. Imagine the Gospel of Thomas being set aside. Its words about seeking the kingdom of heaven within yourself deemed too dangerous for the masses. Picture the Gospel of Mary Magdalene being dismissed. Its portrayal of women's spiritual authority incompatible with the patriarchal structure taking shape. These aren't just religious texts being excluded. These are entire ways of understanding spirituality, community, and human nature being written out of history. The Christianity that emerges from Nicaea isn't the only Christianity that existed. It's simply the version that won the political battle. The excluded texts don't disappear immediately. They're copied by monks who question the official decision. They're hidden in monastery libraries by scholars who believe future generations deserve to know the full story. They're buried in clay jars by communities who refuse to let alternative voices be silenced. But officially, they cease to exist. The Bible that shapes Western civilization for the next 17 centuries is the product of this single editing session, and most believers never know that other versions of their faith were deliberately suppressed. This brings us to one of the most shocking discoveries of the 20th century, a discovery that proved beyond any doubt that the history we've been taught is incomplete. If you're still here listening, leave a like so we know you're following along, and stay with me as we step into the next part of this journey. The year is 1945. World War II is ending, but in the Egyptian desert, a different kind of battle is being fought. A peasant named Muhammad al-Saman is digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi when his shovel strikes something hard. Clay jars, sealed and buried for over 1,500 years. Inside these jars are leather-bound codices containing texts that shouldn't exist according to official Christian history. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Truth. Dozens of early Christian writings that were supposed to have been destroyed centuries ago. As Muhammad breaks open the first jar, he has no idea he's about to shatter the official narrative of Christian origins. The smell of ancient leather fills the desert air. The pages, miraculously preserved, contain words that directly contradict everything the Church has taught about early Christianity. These aren't heretical texts written by enemies of Christianity. These are authentic early Christian documents that present a radically different version of Jesus' message. A version that emphasizes inner spiritual knowledge over institutional authority. A version that includes women as spiritual teachers. A version that suggests the path to salvation doesn't require priests or churches. Just 2 years later, in 1947, another accidental discovery rocks the foundations of religious history. A Bedouin shepherd boy named Muhammad Ahmed El Hamed is searching for a lost goat near the Dead Sea when he throws a stone into a cave and hears pottery breaking. Inside that cave are scrolls that predate the New Testament by centuries. The Dead Sea Scrolls reveal that Judaism at the time of Jesus was far more diverse than anyone imagined. Multiple competing interpretations of Scripture, different ideas about the coming Messiah, alternative practices and beliefs that were systematically excluded from mainstream Judaism. The emotional impact of these discoveries cannot be overstated. Imagine being a biblical scholar in 1947, holding in your hands a manuscript that proves the official story of your faith's origins is incomplete. Imagine realizing that the texts you've spent your life studying represent only one voice in what was actually a chorus of different beliefs. But here's what's most disturbing about these discoveries. They weren't hidden accidentally. They were deliberately buried by communities who knew their beliefs were being suppressed. The people who sealed these jars and hid these scrolls understood that future generations might need to know that alternative versions of truth once existed. These discoveries opened a door that authorities had tried to keep sealed for over 1,000 years. They revealed that religious orthodoxy isn't ancient truth, but relatively recent political consensus. They proved that the foundations of Western spirituality were built on the systematic suppression of alternative voices. And they raised an uncomfortable question. What other truths have been buried, waiting for an accidental discovery to bring them back to light? The pattern of deliberate erasure becomes even more disturbing when we examine entire civilizations that have been systematically written out of history. Civilizations so advanced, so significant, that their complete disappearance from our textbooks can only be explained by intentional suppression. Consider the Hittites. For over 1,000 years, they were one of the 4 great superpowers of the ancient world, standing equal to Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria. They controlled vast territories across what is now Turkey and Syria. They fought Pharaoh Ramesses II to a standstill at the Battle of Kadesh. They signed the world's first known peace treaty. And then they vanished from human memory so completely that when the Bible mentioned them, medieval scholars assumed they were referring to a small, insignificant tribe. It wasn't until archaeologists in the late 19th century excavated their capital city that the world remembered a superpower had once existed. How does an empire that controlled international trade routes for centuries simply disappear from historical consciousness? How does a civilization that created the first known bilateral diplomatic treaty get reduced to a biblical footnote? The answer is chilling in its simplicity. When the Hittite Empire collapsed around 1200 BCE, there was no one left to tell their story. Their cities were abandoned, their writing system forgotten, their cultural memory severed. And the civilizations that survived, Egypt, Assyria, later Greece and Rome, had no interest in preserving the memory of a rival power. But the Hittites weren't unique. The Etruscans, who dominated the Italian peninsula before Rome, suffered a similar fate. They possessed advanced metallurgy, sophisticated urban planning, and a rich religious culture. Early Roman kings were actually Etruscan. Rome inherited engineering techniques, religious practices, and architectural innovations from them. Yet once Rome achieved dominance, Etruscan culture was systematically absorbed and erased. Their language disappeared. Their historical records were destroyed or ignored. Their achievements were rebranded as Roman innovations. Today, we know the Etruscans primarily through Roman sources that portray them as decadent enemies rather than sophisticated predecessors. The pattern repeats across the globe. The Olmecs of Mesoamerica, who developed the first known writing system in the Americas and carved massive stone heads with distinctly non-Native American features, vanished so completely that we don't even know what they called themselves. Olmec is an Aztec word meaning rubber people. These weren't primitive societies that naturally faded away. These were advanced civilizations with complex urban centers, sophisticated technologies, and rich cultural traditions. Their disappearance from historical memory wasn't accidental. It was the result of a systematic process by which conquering civilizations erased their predecessors to legitimize their own dominance. The silence left behind by these vanished civilizations isn't just an absence of information. It's a deliberate void, created to ensure that future generations would never question the narrative of progress that places certain cultures at the center of human achievement. But perhaps the most audacious historical manipulation of all is the creation of entire fictional periods of history. Periods that serve specific political and cultural narratives while obscuring inconvenient truths about human achievement. The most audacious example of this fictional history creation is what scholars euphemistically call the Dark Ages. But what if I told you that the darkness wasn't real? What if the entire concept of medieval Europe as a backward, ignorant wasteland was deliberately fabricated to make the Renaissance appear more revolutionary than it actually was? Picture yourself as a modern historian in 1995, sitting in a dusty archive in Vienna. You're Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and you've spent your career studying medieval manuscripts. You've always accepted the standard narrative. After Rome fell, Europe plunged into centuries of ignorance, superstition, and technological regression. The light of learning was extinguished until the Renaissance rekindled it. But today, you're holding a document that makes your hands shake. It's a treatise on hydraulic engineering from the 9th century Bavaria. The mathematical calculations are sophisticated. The engineering principles are advanced. This isn't the work of ignorant peasants cowering in the darkness. This is cutting-edge technology. You set the manuscript down and reach for another, a medical text from the 10th century England describing surgical procedures that weren't supposed to be rediscovered until the 16th century. Another document, architectural plans from the 11th century France showing building techniques that supposedly didn't exist until the Renaissance. The evidence is overwhelming, and it's been sitting in archives all along. The Dark Ages weren't dark. Medieval Europe was experiencing technological advancement, intellectual growth, and cultural sophistication. But this narrative didn't serve the Renaissance humanists who wanted to position themselves as the saviors of civilization. The myth of the Dark Ages was created by Renaissance scholars who needed to justify their own importance. They couldn't claim to be bringing back the light if the light had never actually gone out. So they invented a period of darkness, systematically ignored evidence of medieval achievement, and created a historical narrative that made their own era seem miraculous. But the deception goes even deeper. Some researchers propose that the Dark Ages weren't just misrepresented, they were artificially extended. The phantom time hypothesis, proposed by German historian Heribert Illig, suggests that nearly 3 centuries of European history, from roughly 614 to 911 CE, never actually happened. Imagine the intellectual vertigo you'd experience if this were true. The year we think is 2024 might actually be 1727. Charlemagne, the great medieval emperor, might be entirely fictional. The Viking raids, the rise of the Carolingian Empire, the establishment of the Holy Roman Empire, all potentially elaborate historical fabrications. Illig's evidence is circumstantial but disturbing. the scarcity of archaeological evidence from this period, the suspicious similarities between artifacts supposedly separated by centuries, the way carbon dating from this era consistently produces anomalous results, the astronomical calculations that don't align with historical records. Whether or not you accept the phantom time hypothesis, it forces a terrifying question. If 3 centuries can be fabricated, what else in our timeline is fictional? While European scholars were busy inventing their dark ages, something remarkable was happening in the Islamic world in Byzantium. Centers of learning were flourishing, libraries were growing, scientific advancement was accelerating. But this doesn't fit the Western narrative of progress, so it's been systematically minimized in our historical consciousness. Picture the House of Wisdom in Baghdad during the 9th century. You're walking through corridors lined with scrolls and codices in dozens of languages. Scholars from India debate with philosophers from Persia. Mathematicians from Alexandria collaborate with astronomers from Damascus. This isn't the Dark Ages. This is the height of human intellectual achievement. In one room, Al-Khwarizmi is developing algebra. In another, Al-Razi is advancing medical knowledge beyond anything known in Europe. Down the hall, scholars are translating and preserving Greek philosophical works that would have been lost forever without their efforts. But when Western historians tell the story of human progress, this golden age of Islamic scholarship becomes a footnote. The narrative skips from Greece and Rome directly to the Renaissance, as if nothing significant happened in between. The preservation of classical knowledge by Islamic scholars is acknowledged only briefly, never given its due as one of the most crucial periods in human intellectual development. This isn't accidental. It's the result of a deliberate decision to frame human progress as essentially Western progress, with brief interludes of darkness relieved by European Renaissance and Enlightenment. The manipulation of historical narrative reaches its most sophisticated form in the realm of ancient technology. Artifacts exist that shouldn't, according to our understanding of human technological development. Yet instead of revising our timeline, these inconvenient objects are either ignored, misclassified, or dismissed as anomalies. Picture yourself as Dr. Wilhelm Koenig, a German archaeologist working in Iraq in 1938. You're cataloging artifacts in the basement of the Baghdad Museum when you encounter something that makes you question everything you thought you knew about ancient capabilities. Clay jars, roughly the size of your fist, dating back over 2,000 years. But these aren't ordinary pottery. You carefully examine the contents: a copper cylinder, an iron rod, traces of acidic residue that could only come from electrolytic solution. Your hands begin to shake as the implications sink in. You're holding what appears to be an ancient battery, an electrical device that predates Alessandro Volta's invention by 2 millennia. The jar trembles in your hands as you realize what this means. If the ancient Mesopotamians had electricity, what else did they possess? What other technologies have been lost, hidden, or deliberately suppressed? You document your findings, publish your theories, and then watch in dismay as the archaeological establishment closes ranks against you. The Baghdad batteries, as they come to be known, are quickly relegated to the margins of serious scholarship. They don't fit the accepted timeline of human technological development, so they're dismissed, ignored, filed away in museum basements where they can't challenge the official narrative. But Koenig's discovery wasn't isolated. Traveled to the waters off the Greek island of Antikythera, where in 1900, sponge divers exploring an ancient Roman shipwreck made a discovery that would haunt archaeologists for over a century. Among the marble statues in Amphora, they found a corroded lump of bronze that initially appeared worthless. Imagine Elias Stadiatos, the diver, surfacing with trembling hands, salt water streaming from his primitive diving helmet. He's been down in the wreck for what feels like hours, his lungs burning, his vision blurred by the murky depths. The bronze object he carries seems insignificant compared to the treasures around it. Just another piece of ancient debris. But when archaeologists finally subjected the artifact to X-ray analysis decades later, they discovered something that shouldn't exist. Intricate bronze gears, more complex than Swiss clockwork, precise mechanical calculations, a device capable of predicting eclipses, tracking planetary movements, and calculating celestial positions with stunning accuracy. The Antikythera mechanism, as it came to be known, represents technology that supposedly wouldn't be developed again for over 1,000 years. It's an ancient computer, sitting in a museum in Athens, silently contradicting everything we've been taught about the linear progression of human knowledge. You can visit it today if you want to see cognitive dissonance made manifest. Tour guides will mention it briefly, almost apologetically, before moving on to safer artifacts that don't challenge fundamental assumptions about ancient capabilities. It exists, therefore it cannot be denied. But its implications are too dangerous to fully acknowledge. But this isn't just about hiding ancient gadgets or mysterious mechanisms. This is about suppressing evidence that human civilization has risen to extraordinary heights before, only to be deliberately brought low by forces that understood the danger of widespread knowledge. The pattern of technological suppression becomes even more disturbing when we examine the massive stone structures scattered across the globe. Structures that demonstrate engineering capabilities that supposedly didn't exist when they were built. Transport yourself to the windswept Altiplano of Bolivia, 13,000 feet above sea level, where the ruins of Pumapunku stand like a reproach to everything archaeology teaches about ancient construction techniques. You're walking among stone blocks that weigh up to 130 tons, cut with such precision that you can't slide a razor blade between the joints. Run your fingers along these surfaces. Feel the mathematical perfection of their angles. These aren't rough-hewn stones laboriously shaped by primitive tools. These are machine-precise cuts with complex interlocking joints that would challenge modern manufacturing capabilities. The official explanation is that the Tiwanaku people who built Pumapunku around 600 CE used only copper tools, stone hammers, and human labor. But stand in front of these megalithic blocks and try to reconcile that explanation with what your eyes are telling you. The cognitive dissonance is overwhelming. These stones weren't just cut. They were engineered with a level of sophistication that suggests advanced machinery, precise measuring instruments, and construction techniques that have been lost to time. Yet rather than revising our understanding of ancient capabilities, mainstream archaeology maintains its rigid timeline, dismissing inconvenient evidence as anomalies. Travel north to the Giza Plateau in Egypt, where the Great Sphinx crouches in eternal silence, guarding secrets that threaten the very foundations of Egyptology. You're standing before a monument that official archaeology dates to around 2500 BCE, during the reign of Pharaoh Khafra. But examine the weathering patterns on the Sphinx's body. The deep, flowing channels carved into the limestone aren't consistent with 4,500 years of wind and sand erosion. They're consistent with heavy rainfall, the kind of sustained precipitation that ended in Egypt around 10,000 years ago. Picture the profound implications of this evidence. If the Sphinx is actually 12,000 years old, it predates Egyptian civilization itself. It suggests that advanced stone carving capabilities existed thousands of years before the accepted timeline allows. It implies that the story of human cultural development is fundamentally wrong. But acknowledging this evidence would require rewriting textbooks, revising academic careers, and admitting that fundamental assumptions about human progress are built on sand. So the evidence is dismissed, the researchers who present it are ridiculed, and the official chronology remains unchanged. The suppression becomes even more blatant when we examine Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. Imagine Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist, in 1994, standing on a hill that local farmers had been using as a burial ground for generations. Beneath his feet lie massive stone pillars, arranged in precise circles, decorated with intricate animal carvings. As Schmidt's team excavates, the scale of the discovery becomes clear. This isn't a simple stone circle. It's a vast religious complex featuring dozens of megalithic temples, some with pillars weighing up to 20 tons. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. The astronomical alignments are precise. The religious symbolism is sophisticated. But here's what makes Göbekli Tepe truly revolutionary. It's over 11,000 years old. It predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. It predates agriculture, cities, and everything we thought we knew about the development of complex human societies. According to the accepted timeline, the people who built Göbekli Tepe were supposed to be nomadic hunter-gatherers, barely capable of making simple stone tools. Yet they created one of the most sophisticated architectural complexes in human history. And then, around 8000 BCE, they deliberately buried it. Not gradually, not through natural processes, but systematically, using millions of tons of earth and rubble. They wanted to hide their achievement from future generations. The implications are staggering. If hunter-gatherers were capable of creating Göbekli Tepe, what other assumptions about prehistoric human capabilities are wrong? What other evidence of advanced ancient civilizations has been ignored because it doesn't fit the approved narrative? But instead of revolutionary reassessment, we get cautious acknowledgement. Göbekli Tepe is mentioned in textbooks as an interesting anomaly, carefully framed to avoid challenging fundamental assumptions about human development. The site is spectacular, but the implications are contained. This pattern of containment extends to artifacts discovered throughout the Americas. Picture Olof Öhman, the Swedish immigrant farmer, in 1898, clearing trees from his land near Kensington, Minnesota. His axe strikes something hard buried among the roots of a poplar tree. He unearths a large stone slab covered with mysterious carved symbols that he doesn't recognize. When experts examine the stone, they find Old Norse and medieval Scandinavian runic inscriptions describing a journey to North America in 1362. The implications are enormous. If authentic, it proves that Europeans were exploring the American interior centuries before the official Age of Discovery. But the stone challenges too many established narratives. The Catholic Church's version of Christian expansion, the Spanish claim to New World exploration, the entire mythology of Columbus opening the Americas to European civilization. So instead of serious investigation, the Kensington runestone is dismissed as a crude forgery, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. The Los Alamos stones present an even more disturbing case of suppression. Discovered near the famous Atomic Research Facility, these ancient artifacts appear to show knowledge of atomic structure that predates modern nuclear physics by millennia. Instead of rigorous study, they've been relegated to pseudo-archaeology, dismissed without proper investigation. Picture the moment of discovery. Workers expanding facilities at Los Alamos in the 1980s unearth carved stones depicting what appear to be atomic diagrams, spirals that correspond to electron orbital patterns, symbols that match nuclear decay processes. imagery that suggests ancient understanding of subatomic physics. The stones are quickly classified, removed from public access, and their very existence denied by official sources. If ancient peoples possessed knowledge of atomic structure, it would shatter our understanding of technological development. It would suggest that human civilization has achieved advanced scientific knowledge before, only to lose it through catastrophe or deliberate suppression. But perhaps the most unsettling example of technological suppression involves maps that shouldn't exist. Maps that show geographical knowledge that predates official exploration by centuries or millennia. The Piri-Reis map, created by an Ottoman admiral in 1513, depicts the coastline of Antarctica with remarkable accuracy. But Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, and it wasn't mapped accurately until the 20th century. More disturbing still, the map shows Antarctica without ice, suggesting it was based on sources that predate the last ice age by thousands of years. Imagine Piri-Reis in his study in Constantinople, surrounded by ancient charts and navigational documents collected from across the known world. He's compiling these diverse sources into a single map, not realizing he's creating evidence of prehistoric global exploration. The map he produces shows coastlines that won't be officially charted for centuries. It depicts geographical features that suggest ancient mariners possessed navigational capabilities and geographical knowledge that rivals modern satellite mapping. But acknowledging the implications of the Piri-Reis map would require admitting that advanced civilizations existed in prehistory, that global navigation was possible thousands of years ago, and that our understanding of human technological development is fundamentally flawed. So instead, the map is explained away as a lucky coincidence, a compilation of errors that accidentally produced accuracy. The evidence is dismissed rather than investigated, contained rather than explored. This systematic suppression of anomalous evidence serves a specific purpose beyond mere academic conservatism. It maintains a narrative of human progress that justifies current power structures, validates cultural superiority claims, and preserves the illusion that we represent the pinnacle of human achievement. The most chilling discovery isn't found in any ancient artifact or buried manuscript. It's found in the realization that the manipulation of history is still happening today, right now, in real time. Modern archaeology, museum curation, and academic publishing continue to filter evidence through the same biases that have distorted our understanding of the past for millennia. Picture yourself as Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a promising young archaeologist in 2019, working on your first major excavation in Turkey. You're part of a team investigating a site that predates known civilizations in the region by several thousand years. The artifacts you're uncovering don't fit any established timeline. The pottery is too sophisticated. The metallurgy is too advanced. The architectural remains suggest urban planning capabilities that supposedly didn't exist yet. Your excitement builds as you document each discovery. This could rewrite the textbooks. This could revolutionize our understanding of human development in this region. You carefully photograph each artifact, measure every stone foundation, record every detail with meticulous precision. But when you submit your findings to the expedition leader, something strange happens. The most significant artifacts are set aside. The measurements that don't fit the expected timeline are questioned. The photographs that clearly show advanced construction techniques are deemed unclear or potentially misleading. Your expedition leader, Dr. Harrison, is a respected figure in the field. He's built his career on the established chronology of this region. He has tenure, book deals, speaking engagements, all dependent on maintaining the accepted narrative. Your discoveries don't just challenge the timeline, they threaten his professional legacy. In a private meeting, Dr. Harrison explains the reality of academic archaeology. Funding comes from institutions that have their own agendas. Publications are controlled by editorial boards that reject papers challenging fundamental assumptions. Career advancement depends on working within established frameworks, not overturning them. Your findings are interesting, he tells you, but they need more context, more supporting evidence, more time to be properly understood. It's academic code for burial. Your discoveries will be filed away, mentioned only briefly in reports that emphasize their anomalous nature, gradually forgotten as the expedition moves on to more conventional findings. You watch in dismay as the most revolutionary artifacts from your excavation disappear into storage boxes, labeled and cataloged but effectively removed from the historical record. The site report will mention a typical Bronze Age settlement, with some unusual features that require further study. The truth becomes a footnote, then disappears entirely. This isn't theoretical. This is happening at archaeological sites around the world. Evidence that challenges established timelines is systematically marginalized, not through conspiracy, but through institutional inertia and professional self-interest. The pattern repeats in museum basements across the globe. The Smithsonian Institution alone has millions of artifacts in storage that are never displayed to the public. The British Museum has entire warehouses filled with objects that don't fit conventional narratives. The Louvre has basement levels most visitors never see, filled with art and artifacts that raise uncomfortable questions about official history. Picture yourself descending into the storage areas beneath the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Your footsteps echo in corridors lined with metal shelving stretching into darkness. Boxes and crates bear labels indicating their contents. Anomalous pottery, origin uncertain. Stone tools, problematic dating. Artifacts requiring further authentication. You open one crate and find carved stones depicting human figures alongside creatures that don't match any known fauna. Another contains metal objects showing advanced alloy composition that predates known metallurgical techniques by centuries. A third holds textiles with dye patterns that shouldn't have been possible given the supposed technological limitations of their era. Each artifact tells a story that contradicts established history. But here they sit, in climate-controlled darkness, seen only by a handful of researchers who've signed non-disclosure agreements. The public, whose donations and tax dollars fund these institutions, never learns of their existence. The curator who guides you through this underground labyrinth explains the reality. We have limited display space. We must prioritize artifacts that support educational goals and public understanding. Controversial items require more explanation than we can provide in typical museum settings. It's institutional doublespeak for censorship. Objects that challenge conventional narratives are deemed too complex for public consumption, as if ordinary people can't handle historical complexity. The result is a sanitized version of human history, scrubbed clean of inconvenient truths and anomalous evidence. But the suppression goes beyond passive neglect. Active measures are taken to discredit researchers who persist in investigating forbidden topics. Academic careers are destroyed. Funding is withdrawn. Papers are rejected not on scientific merit, but on ideological grounds. Consider the fate of Dr. Virginia Steen McIntyre, a geologist who in the 1970s used multiple dating techniques to establish that artifacts at Hueyatlaco, Mexico, were far older than accepted theories allowed. Her findings suggested human presence in the Americas hundreds of thousands of years earlier than mainstream archaeology claimed possible. Instead of celebrated discovery, she faced professional persecution. Her findings were dismissed. Her methodology was questioned despite being standard practice. She was effectively blacklisted from major archaeological projects. Her career was destroyed not because her science was wrong, but because her conclusions were inconvenient. The message was clear to other researchers. Challenge the established timeline at your own peril. The result is a climate of self-censorship, where archaeologists and historians avoid pursuing lines of inquiry that might threaten their professional survival. This institutional suppression extends to the highest levels of academia and government. The Archaeological Institute of America has specific policies about fringe theories. The Society for American Archaeology maintains lists of pseudo-archaeological topics that are effectively blacklisted from serious consideration. University departments have unwritten rules about research directions that will and won't be supported. Picture yourself as a graduate student in 2023, passionate about investigating anomalous archaeological evidence. You want to write your dissertation on the advanced engineering techniques displayed at Puma Punku. Your advisor pulls you aside for a career counseling session. That's not a path to academic success, she explains. If you want to get your PhD, get postdoctoral positions, and eventually secure tenure, you need to work on accepted topics. Study conventional sites. Support established theories. Build your reputation within the mainstream before you think about challenging it. The implicit threat is clear. Pursue forbidden topics, and your academic career is over before it begins. So you abandon your passion project and write a safe dissertation about pottery fragments from a well-documented Roman site. Another potential voice of dissent is silenced before it can speak. This systematic suppression has created a historical echo chamber where only approved narratives are heard. Evidence that contradicts these narratives is filtered out at every level, from excavation to publication to museum display to classroom instruction. The result is a distorted version of human history that serves institutional interests while keeping the public ignorant of their true heritage. But the control mechanisms go beyond academia and museums. Government agencies play an active role in suppressing historical evidence that might challenge national narratives or geopolitical interests. The Smithsonian Institution, despite its reputation as a neutral scientific organization, has deep ties to the U.S. government. Founded by an act of Congress and funded by federal appropriations, it has consistently suppressed evidence that might challenge American historical narratives. Reports of giant skeletons found across North America in the 19th and early 20th centuries were systematically dismissed or disappeared into Smithsonian storage. Native American creation stories speak of ancient giants who once inhabited the continent. Archaeological evidence from the 1800s seemed to support these accounts, with numerous newspaper reports describing the discovery of unusually large human remains. But these findings didn't fit the preferred narrative of gradual human migration and development. Picture yourself as Samuel Hubbard, a respected archaeologist in 1925, leading an expedition to investigate reports of giant petroglyphs in the Grand Canyon. Local Native American guides show you cave systems containing hieroglyphic inscriptions that bear no resemblance to known Native American writing systems. The symbols appear similar to ancient Egyptian or Asian scripts. You document everything carefully, taking photographs and making detailed drawings. The implications are staggering. Evidence of ancient contact between civilizations that supposedly never met. But when you return to report your findings, you encounter unexpected resistance from the Smithsonian Institution. your photographs are questioned. Your documentation is deemed insufficient. Most disturbing of all, when you try to return to the site with additional researchers, you discover that the area has been declared off-limits by the Department of the Interior. The caves are sealed, the site classified, your evidence effectively buried. This pattern repeats across the American Southwest, where numerous sites containing anomalous artifacts or inscriptions have been placed under government protection that prevents independent investigation. The official explanation is always archaeological preservation, but the effect is the suppression of evidence that might challenge established narratives. The situation becomes even more complex when we examine international cooperation in historical suppression. Organizations like UNESCO, while officially dedicated to preserving world heritage, often function as gatekeepers that determine which sites and interpretations receive official recognition and protection. Sites that support conventional historical narratives receive World Heritage status, ensuring funding and protection. Sites that challenge these narratives are ignored or actively discouraged from seeking recognition. The result is a form of historical apartheid, where approved sites thrive while controversial ones languish in obscurity. Picture the frustration of local researchers in Easter Island who have evidence that the famous Moai statues are far older than officially claimed, possibly predating Polynesian settlement of the island. Their findings suggest that the island was inhabited by an unknown civilization that possessed advanced stone carving techniques. But when they attempt to secure funding for additional research or seek international recognition for their discoveries, they encounter bureaucratic obstacles. The established narrative of Polynesian migration and settlement is too important to Pacific archaeological theory to be challenged by inconvenient evidence. Their research is marginalized, their funding requests denied, their papers rejected from major journals. The official story remains unchanged, supported by institutional interests rather than scientific evidence. This international dimension of historical suppression reveals the global scope of the deception. It's not just individual governments or institutions protecting their own narratives. It's a worldwide system of academic and cultural control that maintains specific versions of human history while suppressing alternatives. The technological age has paradoxically made this suppression both easier and more difficult. Digital databases allow for unprecedented control over information flow, but they also create opportunities for suppressed evidence to resurface and spread. Wikipedia, despite its reputation as an open encyclopedia, demonstrates how information control operates in the digital age. Articles about controversial archaeological topics are heavily monitored by editors who maintain strict adherence to mainstream sources. Evidence that challenges conventional narratives is systematically removed or relegated to brief mentions labeled as fringe theories. Attempts to add information about anomalous artifacts, alternative dating methods, or suppressed research are quickly reverted by volunteer editors who function as unpaid censors. The result is a sanitized version of knowledge that appears comprehensive but is actually heavily filtered. Search engine algorithms further compound the problem by prioritizing authoritative sources, typically established institutions and academic publishers who have the most to lose from historical revisionism. Alternative interpretations and suppressed evidence are buried in search results, making them effectively invisible to casual researchers. Social media platforms have implemented similar content control mechanisms, where posts about pseudo-archaeology or fringe history are shadow banned or algorithmically suppressed. The effect is to create information bubbles where only approved narratives are visible, while dissenting voices are marginalized into increasingly isolated communities. But technology also provides new tools for documenting and preserving evidence that institutional gatekeepers would prefer to suppress. High-resolution photography, 3D scanning, and satellite imagery allow independent researchers to document anomalous sites and artifacts with unprecedented precision. Ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive archaeological techniques enable investigation of sites without official permission. Crowdsourced research projects can analyze evidence that mainstream institutions ignore. Blockchain technology offers possibilities for creating tamper-proof archives of suppressed information. The result is an ongoing battle between institutional control and grassroots investigation. The old gatekeepers of historical knowledge are losing their monopoly, but they're not giving up without a fight. Picture yourself as an independent researcher in 2024, using publicly available satellite imagery to investigate anomalous archaeological sites around the world. You discover geometric patterns in the Amazon that suggest large-scale ancient construction. You identify submerged structures off the coasts of India and Japan that appear to be artificial. You document alignments between megalithic sites that span continents. Your findings are documented with scientific precision and made freely available online. But when you attempt to interest academic archaeologists in your discoveries, you encounter a wall of institutional resistance. Your lack of formal credentials is used to dismiss your work regardless of its quality. Your use of unconventional research methods is criticized despite their effectiveness. Most frustrating of all, when your discoveries are eventually investigated by credentialed researchers, they're often published without acknowledgement of your contribution. The institutional system appropriates useful findings while marginalizing the independent researchers who made them possible. This ongoing tension between institutional control and independent investigation represents the current frontier in the battle over historical truth. The old system of academic gatekeeping is breaking down, but new forms of information control are emerging to replace it. The question isn't whether historical manipulation is happening. The evidence is overwhelming that it is. The question is whether the emerging technologies of information sharing and investigation can overcome the institutional forces that have controlled historical narratives for centuries. As we stand at this crossroads, the choices we make about how to research, document, and share historical evidence will determine whether future generations inherit a more complete understanding of human heritage or remain trapped in the carefully constructed illusions that have shaped our understanding of the past. The truth is out there, scattered across museum basements, buried in classified government archives, encoded in suppressed research papers, and waiting in the ground at archaeological sites that mainstream institutions refuse to investigate. The question is whether we have the courage to seek it out and the wisdom to recognize it when we find it. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of historical manipulation isn't what has been hidden, but how easily we've accepted the limitations placed on our curiosity. We've been trained to defer to authority, to accept expert opinion without question, to dismiss evidence that doesn't fit established paradigms. This psychological conditioning runs deeper than simple education. It's a form of cultural programming that makes us complicit in our own ignorance. We police ourselves, rejecting uncomfortable truths before they can even be properly examined. The result is a civilization that prides itself on scientific advancement, while systematically suppressing evidence that challenges its foundational assumptions. We celebrate human achievement while remaining ignorant of our species' true capabilities and history. We claim to value truth while institutionalizing deception on a massive scale. Breaking free from this conditioning requires more than just exposing suppressed evidence. It requires fundamentally changing how we think about knowledge, authority, and truth itself. It requires developing the intellectual courage to question everything we've been taught and the emotional resilience to accept that our most cherished beliefs about human history may be elaborate fabrications. The journey toward historical truth isn't comfortable. It's disorienting, challenging, and sometimes frightening, but it's also liberating. Because once you see through the illusions that have been constructed to limit your understanding, you begin to glimpse the true scope of human potential and the extraordinary heritage that has been stolen from our species. The evidence exists. The truth is waiting. The question is whether we're ready to reclaim our real history and build a future based on understanding rather than ignorance, on truth rather than comfortable lies, on the full scope of human achievement rather than the carefully edited version we've been sold. The choice is ours, but we need to make it soon, because the forces that have shaped and distorted human history for millennia are not passive. They're actively working to maintain their control over the narrative, using increasingly sophisticated methods to suppress inconvenient truths and marginalize those who dare to seek them. The battle for historical truth is far from over. In fact, it may just be beginning, and the outcome will determine not just what we know about our past, but what becomes possible for our future. The trail of suppressed knowledge leads us to one of the most chilling discoveries of all: the systematic elimination of entire writing systems. Not just individual books or documents, but the very ability of civilizations to record their own thoughts. Picture yourself in the year 1566, standing in the central plaza of Mani, watching Bishop Diego de Landa oversee one of history's most devastating acts of cultural annihilation. The smoke rises thick and acrid as thousands of Maya codices feed the flames. You're witnessing the destruction of an entire civilization's written heritage, their astronomy, their mathematics, their history, their poetry, their religious beliefs. The Maya scribes who spent lifetimes perfecting their hieroglyphic writing system watch helplessly as centuries of accumulated knowledge turns to ash. Bishop de Landa justifies his actions as saving souls from pagan corruption. But what he's really doing is erasing evidence that the Maya possessed sophisticated knowledge that challenges European assumptions about civilization and progress. Their astronomical calculations were more accurate than European ones. Their mathematical concepts included 0 centuries before Europeans learned it from Islamic scholars. Their historical records stretched back thousands of years. You can see the terror in the faces of the Maya scholars as their life's work disappears into flames. These aren't primitive savages being enlightened by Christian civilization. These are sophisticated intellectuals watching their culture being systematically murdered. Out of thousands of codices that once existed, only 4 survive today. Imagine the profound loss. It's as if all of European literature, science, and philosophy were reduced to 4 books. The mathematical treatises, the astronomical observations, the historical chronicles, the philosophical works, the poetry, the religious texts, all of it gone except for scattered fragments. But the Spanish conquest of Maya literacy wasn't just about religion, it was about power. A people who can't read their own history become dependent on their conqueror's version of events. A civilization stripped of its written voice becomes silent, unable to defend its achievements or challenge the narrative imposed upon it. This pattern of literacy destruction wasn't unique to the Americas. Travel back in time to ancient China during the Qin dynasty, where Emperor Qin Shi Huang orchestrated one of history's first systematic campaigns of intellectual suppression. Picture yourself as Master Kong, a Confucian scholar in 213 BCE, hiding in your study as imperial soldiers march through the streets of Xianyang. You can hear them breaking down doors, their armored footsteps echoing off cobblestones as they search house by house for forbidden books. Your shelves are lined with centuries of accumulated wisdom, philosophical treatises, historical records, poetry, scientific observations, medical texts. Each scroll represents generations of careful thought and observation. But Emperor Qin has decreed that only practical manuals on medicine, agriculture, and divination may be preserved. Everything else must be burned. The emperor's logic is brutal in its clarity. Books preserve memories of the past, and memories of the past challenge the legitimacy of the present. If people remember the wisdom of previous dynasties, they might question why they should submit to his absolute authority. If scholars debate different philosophical approaches to governance, they might conclude that his methods aren't the only way to rule. You hear soldiers approaching your street. Your hands shake as you try to decide which texts to hide and which to surrender. Do you risk your life to preserve a collection of ancient poetry? Can you bear to watch your grandfather's philosophical writings feed the imperial bonfires? The choice is made for you as soldiers burst through your door. They don't discriminate between profound philosophy and simple poetry. Everything burns. You watch in horror as thoughts that took lifetimes to develop are reduced to cinders in minutes. But Emperor Qin's campaign went beyond book burning. Scholars who protested the destruction were buried alive. The message was clear. Not only would dissenting ideas be eliminated, but the very people capable of thinking them would be exterminated. The result was an intellectual void that lasted for generations. When the Qin dynasty finally fell, much of China's philosophical and historical heritage had been lost forever. Later dynasties had to reconstruct their cultural identity from fragments and memories, never quite recovering the full scope of what had been destroyed. The systematic elimination of literacy as a tool of control reaches its most sophisticated form in the medieval manipulation of language itself. Not just burning books, but making them unreadable by deliberately corrupting the languages they were written in. Transport yourself to 8th century Ireland, where your brother Columba, a monk tasked with preserving ancient Celtic knowledge, the old Ogham script, the Druidic oral traditions, the genealogies and law codes, all of this pre-Christian heritage is considered dangerous by church authorities. But you can't simply burn these traditions because they're not written on parchment. They exist in the memories of bards, in the oral recitations of storytellers, in the ritual practices of communities. So instead, a more subtle form of suppression is employed. You're instructed to translate these traditions into Latin, but the translation process becomes an act of transformation. Pagan deities become Christian saints. Ancient rituals become Christian ceremonies. Historical events are reframed as moral allegories. The original meaning is systematically stripped away and replaced with Christian interpretation. Over time, the original Irish language itself begins to change. Latin vocabulary replaces Celtic terms. Christian concepts overlay pagan worldviews. Within a few generations, the old knowledge becomes literally untranslatable, not because the words don't exist, but because the conceptual framework needed to understand them has been erased. You realize with growing horror that you're participating in the murder of an entire way of thinking. The Celtic understanding of time, nature, spirituality, and community, all of it, is being slowly strangled by the imposition of a foreign conceptual system. But the most insidious part is that this process disguises itself as preservation. Church records will claim that monks saved Irish culture from destruction. They'll point to the illuminated manuscripts, the recorded genealogies, the translated stories as proof of their cultural stewardship. What they won't mention is that these preserved traditions have been so thoroughly transformed that they bear little resemblance to their original forms. It's like claiming to preserve a forest by cutting down all the trees and replacing them with wooden sculptures. This linguistic manipulation becomes a blueprint for cultural conquest that's repeated across Europe as Christianity spreads. Germanic traditions are Christianized beyond recognition. Slavic beliefs are reinterpreted through biblical frameworks. Norse mythology is sanitized and moralized until it becomes unrecognizable. The result is that entire civilizations lose the ability to understand their own heritage. They become culturally dependent on the very institutions that destroyed their original identity. It's a form of intellectual colonization more complete than any military conquest. But perhaps the most chilling example of historical manipulation involves the systematic rewriting of contemporary events in real time. Not ancient history being distorted by later chroniclers, but the immediate fabrication of false narratives as events unfold. Picture yourself as Thomas Müntzer, a radical preacher during the German Peasants' War of 1525. You've witnessed firsthand the brutal suppression of the peasant uprising, the massacre of thousands of common people who dared to challenge the existing social order. But as you flee from the battlefield at Frankenhausen, you encounter something that chills you more than the physical violence. Teams of scribes working for the victorious princes, already crafting the official version of events. These aren't historians working years later to interpret past events. These are professional propagandists manufacturing lies while the blood is still fresh on the ground. They're describing the peasant rebellion not as a legitimate response to oppression, but as the work of heretics and criminals. They're portraying the nobles' brutal suppression not as mass murder, but as righteous justice. You watch in disbelief as witness testimony is collected and then systematically altered. Survivors who describe the peaceful nature of the peasant assemblies have their words twisted to suggest violence and chaos. Evidence of noble brutality is either ignored or reframed as necessary discipline. Most disturbing of all, you realize that this fabricated version of events will become the historical record. Future generations will learn about the Peasants' War not from the perspective of the people who lived it, but from the sanitized propaganda created by those who crushed it. The dead peasants can't tell their own story. The survivors are too traumatized or too terrified to speak truthfully. Only the victor's version will survive, and it bears no resemblance to what actually happened. This real-time historical fabrication represents the ultimate evolution of narrative control. Why wait for later chroniclers to distort events when you can manufacture the preferred version immediately? Why risk inconvenient witnesses when you can control their testimony from the moment it's recorded? You escape with your life, but you carry with you the terrible knowledge that history isn't just manipulated by later generations. It's being falsified as it happens, by people who understand that controlling the narrative is more important than winning battles. This pattern of immediate historical fabrication becomes standard practice across Europe as centralized authorities recognize the power of controlling contemporary records. Court chroniclers don't just record events, they manufacture acceptable versions of them. Official documents don't preserve truth, they create political reality. The implications are staggering. If contemporary records are systematically falsified, then our understanding of historical events is built on foundations of deliberate deception. The chronicles we trust as primary sources may actually be sophisticated propaganda campaigns disguised as objective documentation. This realization forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The manipulation of history isn't just an ancient problem. It's a continuous process that shapes our understanding of events from the moment they occur. The authorities who control the recording of history have always understood that narrative power is more important than factual accuracy. But the most profound manipulation of all may be the systematic suppression of human technological capability itself, not just hiding individual inventions or discoveries, but maintaining the illusion that technological progress follows a linear path from primitive to advanced. Picture yourself as Johann Bessler in early 18th century Germany, demonstrating your perpetual motion machine to astonished witnesses. The device runs continuously for weeks without any apparent external power source. University professors examine it and cannot explain how it works. Government officials witness its operation and certify its authenticity. But instead of revolutionizing human understanding of energy and motion, your invention disappears into bureaucratic obscurity. The academic establishment, invested in Newtonian mechanics, refuses to seriously investigate phenomena that challenge their theoretical frameworks. The guild system, dependent on controlling existing technologies, sees your device as a threat to their economic power. Your machine is dismissed as fraud despite overwhelming evidence of its functionality. Your reputation is destroyed. Your workshop is ransacked. Your notes are confiscated. Within a generation, your achievement is remembered only as a historical curiosity, an example of pre-scientific delusion rather than genuine innovation. But your experience isn't unique. Throughout history, technological breakthroughs that don't fit established paradigms have been systematically suppressed, not because they don't work, but because they threaten existing power structures. Consider the fate of Nikola Tesla's wireless energy transmission experiments. In the early 20th century, Tesla demonstrated the ability to transmit electrical power through the atmosphere without wires. His Colorado Springs laboratory generated artificial lightning and powered devices at considerable distances. Picture yourself as Tesla's assistant in 1899, watching in amazement as electric bulbs light up miles away from any power source. The implications are revolutionary. Unlimited clean energy that could be freely available to all humanity. No more coal mines, no more power plants, no more energy scarcity. But Tesla's wireless energy research is abruptly terminated when his financial backers realize that free energy can't be metered and sold. J.P. Morgan and other investors withdraw funding not because the technology doesn't work, but because it threatens their control over energy distribution. Tesla's Colorado Springs laboratory is dismantled. His research notes are confiscated by government agents after his death. His wireless energy patents are classified and buried in federal archives. The technology that could have transformed human civilization is suppressed to protect the profits of energy monopolies. This pattern repeats throughout the 20th century as breakthrough technologies are systematically suppressed by institutions that profit from maintaining artificial scarcity. Water-powered engines are bought up and buried by oil companies. Advanced battery technologies are shelved to protect gasoline sales. Medical treatments that actually cure diseases are suppressed in favor of profitable symptom management. The authorities who shape our understanding of history also shape our understanding of what's possible. The result is a civilization that accepts scarcity, environmental destruction, and technological dependence as inevitable when abundant, clean, and decentralized alternatives may have been available all along. The machinery of historical suppression operates most efficiently when it targets knowledge at its very source. But what happens when suppressed information resurfaces centuries later? challenging everything we thought we knew. The most devastating examples come from discoveries made by accident, findings that slip through the cracks of institutional control and force us to confront uncomfortable truths about our past. Picture yourself as Heinrich Schliemann in 1871, standing before the ruins of what you believe to be ancient Troy. You're not just an archaeologist. You're a man obsessed with proving that Homer's epic poems describe real places and real events. The academic establishment has dismissed you as a wealthy amateur, a treasure hunter masquerading as a scholar. But as your workers clear away centuries of accumulated debris, you uncover something that makes your hands tremble. Layer upon layer of ancient cities, each built on the ruins of the last. 9 distinct periods of habitation stretching back thousands of years before the accepted date of the Trojan War. You're holding pottery shards that don't match any known ancient Greek styles. You're examining building techniques that supposedly didn't exist when Troy was supposed to have been built. Most disturbing of all, you're finding evidence that this site was connected to a vast trade network that spanned continents. Connections that contradict everything historians believe about ancient commerce and communication. But when you attempt to publish your findings, you encounter the same institutional resistance that has silenced inconvenient discoveries for centuries. Your lack of formal archaeological training is used to dismiss your evidence. Your methods are criticized despite their effectiveness. Most frustrating of all, later excavations at the site carefully avoid investigating the layers that produced your most controversial findings. Your discovery of Troy becomes sanitized, reduced to a confirmation of Homeric geography, while the broader implications of your evidence are buried. The academic establishment appropriates your achievement while suppressing the parts that challenge their fundamental assumptions about ancient civilization. This pattern of discovery and suppression reaches its most dramatic form in the accidental unearthing of texts that were meant to stay hidden forever. Documents that reveal the systematic manipulation of religious and historical narratives by the very institutions we trust to preserve them. Transport yourself to December 1945 in the Egyptian desert near the town of Nag Hammadi. You are Mohammed al-Saman, a local farmer digging for fertilizer to improve your family's crops. The work is backbreaking under the harsh sun, but poverty leaves you no choice but to search for any substance that might help your barley grow. Your shovel strikes something hard beneath the sandy soil. Clay jars, large and sealed, obviously ancient. Your first thought isn't archaeological significance, it's the practical value these containers might have. But when you break open the first jar, the smell of old leather fills the desert air. Inside are books, bound in leather, their pages covered with symbols you don't recognize. The Coptic script is meaningless to you, but something about these texts feels important. Dangerous even. You've heard stories from the old men in your village about treasures buried by ancient Christians fleeing persecution. What you don't realize is that you're holding the most significant religious discovery of the 20th century. These are the Nag Hammadi codices, early Christian texts that present a radically different version of Christianity than anything taught in modern churches. The Gospel of Thomas, which emphasizes finding the kingdom of heaven within yourself. The Gospel of Philip, which speaks of sacred marriage between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. The Gospel of Truth, which describes salvation through inner knowledge rather than institutional authority. You take the books home, not understanding their significance. Your mother, needing fuel for the fire, burns several of them before you can stop her. The irony is devastating. Texts that survived 15 centuries of deliberate suppression are destroyed by accident in your own kitchen. But the surviving codices make their way to antiquities dealers, then to scholars, then to a world that isn't prepared for what they reveal. These aren't heretical texts written by enemies of Christianity. These are authentic early Christian documents that show the diversity of belief in the first centuries after Jesus' death. Picture the shock of biblical scholars in 1945 as they realized that Christianity was never the unified faith they thought it was. Multiple competing interpretations existed from the very beginning. Different communities had different ideas about Jesus' nature, his message, and the path to salvation. The Christianity that eventually became Orthodox wasn't the only version. It was simply the one that won the political battle. The Nag Hammadi discovery proves that the biblical canon was assembled through a process of selection and exclusion that had more to do with institutional power than divine inspiration. The texts that were left out weren't inferior or false. They were inconvenient to the hierarchical church structure that was taking shape. But even as these revolutionary documents come to light, the process of containment begins immediately. The texts are relegated to academic study rather than popular awareness. They're described as Gnostic texts, using a label that implies they represent a fringe movement rather than authentic early Christianity. Their implications are carefully minimized, their revolutionary potential neutralized through scholarly compartmentalization. Just 2 years later, another accidental discovery shatters our understanding of religious history. A young Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Ahmed el-Hamed is searching for a lost goat in the cliffs near the Dead Sea when he throws a stone into a cave and hears pottery breaking. Picture yourself as that shepherd boy, peering into the darkness of Qumran Cave 1 in 1947. The sound of shattering clay echoes off the cave walls. Your curiosity overrides your caution as you squeeze through the narrow opening, your eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the entrance. What you see takes your breath away. Clay jars, ancient and carefully sealed, containing scrolls wrapped in linen. The leather is dark with age, but remarkably preserved by the desert climate. You've stumbled upon the greatest archaeological discovery of the modern era, the Dead Sea Scrolls. These scrolls contain Hebrew texts that predate the New Testament by centuries. They reveal that Judaism at the time of Jesus was far more diverse than anyone imagined. Different groups had different interpretations of Scripture, different ideas about the coming Messiah, different practices and beliefs. The scrolls describe a religious community that practiced baptism, shared meals, and awaited a teacher of righteousness, practices and beliefs that closely parallel early Christianity. The implications are staggering. Either Christianity developed independently along similar lines, or there was direct influence between these Jewish sectarians and the early Christian movement. But once again, the revolutionary potential of the discovery is carefully contained. The scrolls are locked away for decades, accessible only to a small group of approved scholars. When portions are finally published, they're presented in ways that minimize their challenge to established religious narratives. The pattern repeats itself. Accidental discovery reveals suppressed truth. Institutional authorities move to control the narrative. Revolutionary implications are buried beneath layers of scholarly caution and religious orthodoxy. These discoveries prove that the manipulation of religious history wasn't a medieval phenomenon. It began in the earliest centuries of Christianity and has continued right up to the present. The authorities who shaped Christian doctrine weren't preserving divine truth. They were manufacturing it, selecting which texts would be included and which would be buried. But even when writing systems survive, the knowledge they contain can be systematically corrupted through more subtle means. The deliberate mistranslation and reinterpretation of texts allows conquerors to maintain the appearance of preserving culture while actually transforming it beyond recognition. Picture yourself as Brother Columba, a monk in the 8th century Ireland, tasked with preserving ancient Celtic knowledge by translating it into Latin. The old Ogham script, the Druidic oral traditions, the genealogies and law codes, all of this pre-Christian heritage is considered dangerous by church authorities. But you can't simply burn these traditions because they're not written on parchment. They exist in the memories of bards, in the oral recitations of storytellers, in the ritual practices of communities. So instead, a more subtle form of suppression is employed. You're instructed to translate these traditions, but the translation process becomes an act of transformation. Pagan deities become Christian saints. Ancient rituals become Christian ceremonies. Historical events are reframed as moral allegories. The original meaning is systematically stripped away and replaced with Christian interpretation. Over time, the original Irish language itself begins to change. Latin vocabulary replaces Celtic terms. Christian concepts overlay pagan worldviews. Within a few generations, the old knowledge becomes literally untranslatable. Not because the words don't exist, but because the conceptual framework needed to understand them has been erased. You realize with growing horror that you're participating in the murder of an entire way of thinking. The Celtic understanding of time, nature, spirituality, and community, all of it is being slowly strangled by the imposition of a foreign conceptual system. The most insidious part is that this process disguises itself as preservation. Church records will claim that monks saved Irish culture from destruction. They'll point to the illuminated manuscripts, the recorded genealogies, the translated stories as proof of their cultural stewardship. What they won't mention is that these preserved traditions have been so thoroughly transformed that they bear little resemblance to their original forms. It's cultural taxidermy. The external form is maintained while the living spirit is completely removed. This linguistic manipulation becomes a blueprint for cultural conquest that's repeated across Europe as Christianity spreads. Germanic traditions are Christianized beyond recognition. Slavic beliefs are reinterpreted through biblical frameworks. Norse mythology is sanitized and moralized until it becomes unrecognizable. This fabricated version becomes the historical record. Tonight we've journeyed through the ruins of burned libraries, witnessed the systematic destruction of entire civilizations' voices, and uncovered evidence that our most fundamental assumptions about human history are built on carefully constructed lies. From the Baghdad batteries to the Nag Hammadi codices, from Göbekli Tepe to the suppressed technologies of Tesla, the pattern is undeniable. Those who control the present have always understood that controlling the past means controlling the future. The machinery of historical manipulation isn't some ancient conspiracy. It's operating right now in real time, shaping what you're allowed to know about your own species' heritage. But here's what they can't suppress: your curiosity, your ability to question, your right to seek truth beyond the sanitized narratives they've fed you since childhood. The evidence exists, scattered across archaeological sites they don't want you to visit, buried in research papers they hope you'll never read, locked away in archives they pray you'll never access. The choice is yours. You can accept the comfortable lies that keep you ignorant of humanity's true potential, or you can begin the uncomfortable journey toward understanding what we really are and what we're truly capable of. The authorities who've shaped your understanding of history are counting on your compliance, your willingness to defer to their expertise, your fear of being labeled a conspiracy theorist for asking inconvenient questions. But once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Once you understand how history has been weaponized against human potential, you begin to glimpse what civilization could become if we reclaimed our real heritage. The truth is waiting. The only question is whether you have the courage to seek it. If you are still here and this journey has sparked something in you, please support us with a like or subscribe if it's your first time watching the channel. Share with us the mysteries you would like us to explore next. Until next time, sweet dreams and keep questioning. Good night.